So we can create our own rules with VineJS as well. And the documentation does a fantastic job of walking through this. And the example that they give is great as well. So we're going to walk through that in this lesson in the context of AdonisJS. So we're going to be provided a couple of things whenever we create a rule. We're going to be provided the value, which will be of type unknown. So we're going to need to discern what the type is before we actually attempt to use it. Options accepted by the rule. These are options that we can define as is. So this could be something like a table or a column to check the database to see whether or not a value is unique. That's something defined by us. And if we define the rule to have nothing as options, then the second parameter will be undefined. Then comes the field context. This is contextual information about the actual field data. So things like the value, data, metadata, whether the field is valid, defined, you can mutate the value, report errors, field parent, name, and whether or not it's an array member. So that's what's confined within the field context. So to start, we're going to need a place to house our new validation rule. For this, we'll want to use a preload file. So we can stop our server. Let's clear that out. And let's do node ace make preload. We'll put these inside of a directory called rules. And we're going to follow along with the documentation's example. So we'll create a unique rule to simplify the unique checks throughout our validation example. Remember, right now within our application, if we dive inside of our auth validator, our unique check looks something like this, where we're taking a callback function that's provided into the database, manually compiling out that query, and then returning back whether or not we found results. So we're going to wrap this up in a pretty little bow, where all that we need to do is provide in the table and the column that we want to check, and the check will happen automatically. So let's hide that back away. Let's run that to create our preload. We'll have it register it within our AdonisRC.ts file, and we're good to go there. Let's go ahead and boot our server back up while we're here. All right, let's hide that back away and dive into our text editor, and let's head into our new preload file. So that's within our start directory. We created that within a folder called rules, and there's our file for unique. Within here, we're going to want an async function. We'll call this function our rules name. Within the documentation, they call this unique. However, I don't want to overwrite the current unique check that we have. We'll leave this in place. So let's name our simplified rule something different. Maybe something like IsUnique. Our parameters to this method will then be the value, which, as the documentation noted, is of type unknown. So we need to discern what type the actual value holds before we can use it. Then options. By default, if we don't want our method to accept any options, this will be undefined. We do want ours to accept options, but just to get us going, let's stub that to undefined for right now. And then our field information, which is of type field context, which we can import from VineJS Vine types. Since we're specifically going to use that just as a type, we'll import that as a type there as well. So for our options, let's go ahead and create a type for that. So we'll do type options equals object. We'll have one option be our table. So the table that we should check against for the column, this will be a type string, and then the column that we should check against inside of that table. Let's jump down to our options and set that as the type value there. The first thing we're going to want to do is check the type of our value. For the documentation, they show this as just being a string, and they kick out anything that is not a string. But I could see this being used for an ID as well. So I think we'll allow numbers within ours as well. So let's do if type of value does not equal string and type of value does not equal number, then we'll just want to return back out of this method so that this particular method doesn't handle either of those types. We're going to add our isUnique method as an option onto VineString and VineNumber. So if the value doesn't match one of those two types, the VineString or VineNumber validation will handle that accordingly. So within our actual unique check, we don't need to report the error at this point because that VineString or VineNumber check will take care of that for us. We can just ignore the value here. Then if our value is a string or a number, we can move onwards. So we'll do const result equals await, and then we're going to want to import the database module because we don't know what particular model we're going to be working with here. So we can use the database module to accept in the table that we should check against and hone that in on the particular column to check and see whether or not we have a value. So we'll import db from @AdonisJS Lucid services db. We can scroll back down and make use of that db query builder. So db.from, provide in our options.table, select just the options.column that we want to hone in on, where that options.column equals the value that's provided in. And then if any of them exist inside of the database, the isUnique check will be false. So we can just stop at the first found record and get that back as our result. So if we have a result, then we'll want to report that the value is not unique. So we'll do field, and then we can use that report method that we saw inside of the documentation to report an error. The first argument here is going to be that error message. The second argument is going to be the rule that failed. And then the third argument is going to be the field information for our validation. So for this value, we could do something like this and then reach for interpolation and specify in the field. And this would plop something in like this. And then if we're validating an email, this would be this email is already taken or something like that. The rule here is unique. And then the field information we can provide in as the third argument. If this rule is valid, however, we don't want to report an error, and instead we can just escape out of this function, so we don't need to do anything else. Okay, so we have the function handler for our rule fully defined. Now we need to register it with VineJS. So first thing, we're going to want to import Vine from VineJS/Vine. Scroll back down, and let's do const IsUnique rule equals Vine dot, and there's a method on here called create rule that will actually create a Vine validator rule for the function that we provide in. So we'll just want to provide in our IsUnique function there. Now we've actually created a Vine rule with our IsUnique method, and the full rule is our IsUnique rule variable. We could export this so that we could use it as needed elsewhere, but as stated earlier, we could also add this directly onto the types that we want this rule to be available for as well, which in our case is both our string and our number types. So let's import Vine string, which is the rule set for the Vine string validator, and then Vine number, which is the same thing for the number validator. Scroll back down and let's do a macro for both of those. So we'll do Vine string first, create a macro called IsUnique. We'll create a block level function that accepts in this, which is of type Vine string. And this is an instance of the actual validation rule that's being built specifically for the string type. And then the second argument will want to be the actual options that we accept into our new IsUnique validation rule. So that's going to be the options type that we defined at the top of this file. Let's define that as a block level function and then return this dot, and we can use to push our validation rule into the applied validations for this specific Vine string instance. So for this use method, we'll want to provide in our IsUnique rule, not the actual IsUnique function. So we'll do IsUnique rule. We'll call that as a function and provide the options into it. Okay, now we're getting a red squiggly on our IsUnique string because IsUnique is not assignable to a parameter of type key Vine string because it has not been defined on the actual type set. So we'll want to do that next. So let's declare module at VineJS/Vine. Then we'll want to reach for the Vine string interface. So Vine string there and add in our IsUnique rule and designate that this accepts an options of type options and returns back the validation rule builder of type this. And now we should have that readily available to us. Furthermore, if we now dive back into our auth validator, before where we call this unique, let's attempt to do now dot IsUnique, and there is our brand new rule. And if we attempt to call it, we'll see that it accepts in our options. So we could provide in our object with a type table. For this, we want to check the users table and provide in the column, and we'll want to check the email column there. So now we should be able to get rid of this big function call and just use our brand new IsUnique rule. And additionally, we've left that unique method there just in case we need it in the future for more expandability. Okay, let's jump back into our unique rule and apply this for our number types as well. It's going to look very similar to this. The types are just going to be different. So we'll do Vine number. This right here will be Vine number as well. And then we just want to copy the interface, paste it in here, and switch this from Vine string to Vine number. And now we have this available for numbers as well as strings. So if we were to try to dive back into our auth validator, let's do something like user ID. This doesn't make much sense, but just so that we can actually see that it's available, let's do Vine number dot IsUnique. And there we go. So it's available there as well. But if we do something that we haven't applied it to, like remember me, Vine Boolean type IsUnique, it does not exist there. So awesome. Everything's looking a-okay. The last thing to do is to actually test it out and make sure that it works. So with our server running, let's head back into our application. Let's jump into our register page because this is where we're actually using that unique check rule. We'll provide John for our first name, test@test.com for our email, and then just whatever for the password. And there we go. We got back our error. This email is already taken as we've described it within our brand new custom rule. Let's switch this to test2@test.com, which does not exist inside of our database. And let's enter in a valid password, attempt to register, and voila, everything worked a-okay. We didn't get any errors with our validation. And we can check our terminal out once more, and we see the actual created user within here as well. So we know everything worked a-okay in terms of our user being created.